This is the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast with your host, Greg Jameson. Influencer marketing is the process of identifying, researching, engaging, and supporting the people who create high-impact conversations with your customers. On each episode, I talk with industry leaders, business rock stars, and internet celebrities who contribute their knowledge about influencing others and growing your influence.
Welcome to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. I'm your host, Greg Jameson, and I've got a really fun episode for you today. I've got a guest here. His name is Buvala, and Sean is a storyteller. And storytelling is something that I think is huge for us as entrepreneurs when we're trying to sell our products and services. And it's something that I think a lot of us don't necessarily understand. I'm probably in the same boat as everybody listening to the podcast, so I'm here to learn as well as you are. But welcome, Sean. I'm really happy that you're here with us today. And why don't you tell our listeners more about yourself?
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoy the format of your show, and I'm glad to be with you today. You know, one of the things that's probably most ingrained into us as human beings is storytelling. We are narrative focused. Our brains function and put things together in narratives, kind of the purpose of dreams as well. There's been some great books that have come out on that very subject about who we are as the storytelling animal, as a matter of fact. So, my work has been helping people take that great truth that people think in story and narrative and apply that to their organizations, apply that to their businesses, apply that to their relationships too, because I've done some work in family work as well. But for our purposes today, we're talking about, how do we connect these things to business? And so that's my work since I started in the late 80s. So 86, 87 was probably when I first got running. So I've been at this well before kind of the fad of storytelling began. Everybody's kind of throwing that word around right now. So I began very early in that, and we've been working through those different forms of that up until right at this very moment, as a matter of fact. And that's been our stuff. I put some books out. We've done some websites. We've actually websites out that were older than Google. So, a lot of experience in the field that we're going to talk about.
You say that websites that are older than Google. I have to laugh here. And it all started out by telling a story. I don't know if it's a good story or not, but I've been developing websites since 1995, which is before Google. And so I actually used to have this slogan out there where I would show the Google logo and say, searching the web since whenever it was, 1998 or whatever, web stores, creating the web since 1995.
Yeah, I think that's a really good image of that. When we began the work that we were doing Storyteller.net back in the day, and Storyteller.net still exists. It's all in Google. And at the time, a lot of our focus was helping other artists, other storytellers develop their own presence on the web. And a pushback that I got from that site about putting recorded audio online, that it was going to destroy the art form because now people could get it for free. Greg, we were doing this in real audio. I have files I can't translate now. That's how old some of these files are. So yeah, like you, I've been at this a while.
So storytelling is, as I was saying in the introduction, I think it's huge because people remember stories. They don't remember facts and figures. But
Right.
When you're selling a product or a service, people really can relate to a story, and especially if it applies to them. So it seems to me like storytelling can be downright magical in terms of your sales. But as I was saying, I also think, most people don't really know how to do it very good. Can you give us any pointers on things that people should be doing or looking for?
Yeah, I want to kind of dig through that the foundational stuff that you just talked about. What's really important is we want to be careful about the magical nature of storytelling. Storytelling is not a cure-all for things. What's really important for me, it's when I'm working with new clients, is to say, storytelling does not replace facts. Rather, it's the basket that carries those facts in. It frames those facts. It outlines those facts so that the competition is not between should I tell facts or should I tell stories. Really, the two of those things are working together. What story allows you to do is to put those facts in an emotional basket, an emotional frame that people can then approach those facts with in a much more um, organic way. The example that I use is, and I've worked a lot with IT people, and that's not all I work with, but that's been a background. And people will come in and say, we need the upgrade to this system. And I have to go convince the money people that have to upgrade this very expensive software, upgrade. We do 1,000, Apple upgrades or something, and we have to spend all this money. And so to take that back, those facts to people who are surrounded by money, they don't get it. When you say, when XYZ company down the road upgraded to this system, they had a 10% increase in productivity. That then allows you to say, here's what I need, and here's how it affects you. And even in the simplest narrative of need down the road got a 10% increase, that allows us to let story kind of carry those things. I was working for an organization trying to fund some work once, and one of the ways that we did that to get an organization funded from something that was underfunded, not only did I go to my leadership and say, I need more money, but we took the stories of the people who were affected by the work that we did, and we shared, with their permission, we shared their stories with the funding people. So we didn't just go to them and say facts, which we had all our ducks in the row. I also said, here's how this looks in real life. These people are affected by the money that they're asking for. And so that's how story then carries those facts. Am I making sense on that? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that helps there. The thing we want to do in storytelling is to understand that not every phrase that we say is story. And that's one of the struggles I think we're having with educating people about story right now. Saying to people, our customers love us, is not a story. It's advertising, and there's nothing wrong with advertising. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Sorry about that. I thought I had taken care of. There's nothing wrong with advertising, but it's also not storytelling. Giving the story of someone who came from a point, a beginning, how we worked with them, the B point, the middle, and how they ended up the end of the story. That's a complete narrative.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you about. You just said point A, B, and C. One of the things that I have seen a lot with storytelling is that people say that the plot should be, here's a person with a problem, and they're going through all of these problems, kind of going up this curve type thing, and then they get to whatever the solution is and their aha moment, and then the plot kind of comes back down the other side, and you have the resolution at the end of, hey, I did this, and I bought product X, and it was great, and it saved the earth or whatever.
Right. Yeah, life was forever changed by these snacks. If it wasn't for these pre-cut snacks, my life wouldn't be any good. Yeah, people fall into the mythic structure, and the mythic structure of something has to encounter, as you're saying, a trouble, or up the hill, down the hill, whatever model people want to use. Those are structures for stories. I'd like to reduce that to the really simplest point of that, because I think it's easy to overthink story, to overthink and try to make these huge formulas, when at some level the concept of beginning, middle, and end really is all that you need in that.
Yeah. So is there a specific story plot or structure that you recommend for people when they are trying to sell something then? Or do we just look to Hollywood and say, let's, make our sales be like Indiana Jones or Star Wars or something?
Right. That's a great question for that. I think looking towards blockbusters is not going to help the customer who's come into your building and their car isn't working. Do you know what I mean? And so when somebody gets to a point where their car has failed, their automobile has failed in service, they're not looking for heroics. They're looking for, do you have a background that can solve this problem? And when they go to your website or they engage in you in some way, do they encounter the stories of how you've helped them? We keep thinking people they want a new transmission when what they want is safety. What they want is safety. And their two little kids are in the back of the car and they're being driven around. So what I say to people is, let's go find your 7 core stories that help the person coming into your building, help them to know I can trust you, through these basic stories. What are your success stories? What's your origin story, your passion story? What are some of your stories of failure and how did you correct it? Those kind of, when somebody comes to your place and they see a customer say, I was here, my car failed on a Monday morning at 7 a.m. and I had a sick kid back. And so when I went to XYZ car repair, they took my car in, but also their mechanic took me and my child and dropped us off at the doctor's office and then came back and picked us up afterwards. And when we were was repaired and running smoothly, XYZ Auto is going to have my business for the rest of their lives. That's where that story stuff happens, when we let somebody else talk about how we are their hero versus us saying we're the hero. We want to be really careful about being the hero of story. That's really some off tee that's happening right now.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And that really ties in with kind of the theme of the podcast of letting other people sell for you, influencing them to make a decision because, somebody else is telling their story and their story happens to be one of, you guys are great.
Right. I also encourage people to find times when a customer really didn't like you and you moved and you either learned from that experience and said, here's how we changed, or you talk about how you directly worked with that person in that moment to get them what they wanted. Because we all have stories of things when things go wrong. And to deny those things and to make everything heroic and people just love us 24 hours a day, we know that's not true. And to be able to embrace those things and to be future looking in our stories, to say, here's where our organization is going. That's especially true for nonprofits. Here's where our organization is going. That's one of those 7 key stories. Embrace the totality of who you are as a company and what you're about. That's what storytelling allows us to do.
I love that whole idea of talking about when things didn't go well. I remember in my previous company, we had a very upset customer. Don't even remember why at this point, but they were mad and they wanted their money back and all this other stuff. And we ended up appeasing them and getting them to where they were not only happy, they ended up being one of our best customers for years. And I think that can be really powerful. So I like what you said. Okay.
I think go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Sometimes talking about failure stories allows you to illustrate what appears to be a failure at first and fails. I was working for one of the big pharma companies, and they brought me in to introduce storytelling as a concept to this huge pharma organization. So I'm in a room full of people that are multiple PhDs and MDs and PharmDs and people that just educated to the nth degree, and people that didn't get where they were by accident. They built up their companies. So I came into this organization, and from most people I was getting really positive feedback as we're in this giant room. But there was that one gentleman across the table over there, and at one point we got talking and he wasn't participating, and I just asked him point blank. I said, is there a challenge? Is there something that I'm missing in my instructions that's keeping you from participating? Well, I already understand everything there is to know about storytelling. I said, okay. And he says, matter of fact, let me tell you a story. And when he did that to a man and a woman around the table, they either dropped their table or they rolled their eyes. And in that moment, they all understood my concept is that not everyone who thinks they are a storyteller is a storyteller. In that moment of being pushed back by this leader that, Sean, don't know what I'm doing, they illustrated for themselves the very concept I was talking about, that this gentleman across the table was going to tell a story, and not one of them wanted to hear him talk. So in a failure moment, when he was pushing back against me, the room proved that we were correct about this. And once he's talking, people would come up to me at the break and go, "Oh, so sorry about," I said, "Well, what did you learn from him?" And that's where we moved. And that failure moment, that challenge moment, became a teachable moment. That story of that holds that. The idea of dropping your pen on the table and rolling your eyes, we all know exactly what that looks like. Right? We all know what that feels like. So that was that teachable moment that came from, I first was failing with this guy, and then we moved it over. That's one of those challenge stories.
So you said that there are 7 stories that all entrepreneurs should know, and you mentioned a couple of them. Can you list what they are?
I can. I always have to double check my list because I get them out of order. Origin, purpose, success. Origin, purpose, success, challenge, failure, future, and teaching. What's interesting about these various stories is that the definitions of them are kind of porous. Sometimes, like the failure and the challenge and the teaching, those kind of mix together. And what first looks like this is my failure story has a very porous border on it, and they blend in a bit. Oh, my set isn't you have to find these and then you're done. My set is use this set of stories as your model for finding your own stories and creating your own stories. I think there are 7 really strong ones. If I tell people anything at the beginning, focus on your origin story. How did you get started doing what you do? Your purpose story. Why do you do what you do? Not your passion story. Passion is the most overused word right now in business, but purpose. If nothing else, work on your origin and your purpose story. And those, again, are porous. If you can get those down, you form yourself a really strong foundation to get started.
Sounds great. So we need to take a quick break. And on the other side of the break, I want to do 2 things. One, I want to delve into specific examples of some of those kinds of stories, if you've got some that you've heard. And
Sure.
The other, you have said that the elevator pitch is dead, and I want to find out what that's all about. So let's address that right after this.
Very good.
Hi, I'm Greg Jameson, the host of the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. Every week, I not only have the opportunity, but the real privilege of interviewing experts in their field, true thought leaders, and I get to share this information with you. The purpose of this is really to help you sell more of your products and services online, which is the core premise of my primary business, Web Stores Limited. At Web Stores, we go out and we create e-commerce websites for small businesses. Plus, we do internet marketing and digital advertising for those businesses to really help them sell more online. We have a whole number of resources and tools designed to help make this process easier for businesses, probably much like yours. I've been the author of several #1 best-selling books, including Amazon's Dirty Little Secrets and The Influencer Effect, plus a whole series of online courses if you want to learn how to do this stuff yourself. The best way to remain in contact with me, besides subscribing to this podcast, of course, is to simply go to gregjameson.com free gift, where I have a special offer for you simply because you are a valued listener to this podcast. Thanks again, and now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back to the 20 Minutes of Influence podcast. My guest today is Sean Buvala. And right before the break, Sean and I were talking about the 7 types of stories. And I specifically was asking him if he had any examples of a story that he could share with us to kind of get our juices flowing here, I guess, in terms of how it might apply to our businesses. So take it away, Sean.
Yeah, you bet. Origin stories, and one of the reasons I said before the break that people should get an origin story really well established is customers want to know why you're doing what you do and how did you get started, especially when you do unusual things, or you're doing something that's very common that seems really competitive. So house painting or car repair or what have you. For me, my origin story is really important to me and why we did that. People say, how did you get started in that? And to give you the shorter version of that, which will lead to a later conversation, the shorter version of that is I was working in a nonprofit organization, and once a week I would go into a classroom in one of these more inner city locations. And my job was to go in once a week and do what we were calling use education at the time with them. And so I would go into the classroom, 13-year-olds, 8th grade, the teacher would leave and have her hour off to go do her work. And this was a tough group of kids. And a lot of times she'd walk out of the room, and as she passed me from me coming in, she would just kind of roll her eyes to me and say, good luck. When kids were having these really terrible days. So I get in the classroom, and these were tough kids, man. These were not, hi, Mr. Buvala. They were tough kids. And so I was in particular with them, and I thought, okay, this is going to die today, and it may be me. These kids did not want to do anything. So I'm hearing about the storytelling stuff. So I began to pull them out of the seats to become parts of a story I was going to tell them. And they became the characters in the story. They became the house, fence, the trees, the animals. I had this whole room of kids being part of this story that I was completely doing on the fly. It was just like, please don't hurt me. So we did this. So we did the story. We survived that. I was like, whew. Next week when I go back into the classroom, and the classroom begins, one of the bigger kids says to me, sit down, I want to show you something. A knife? A bag of weed? I don't know. So I sit down, and they start telling me a story in the same model that they had worked on, the class collectively, on their own time during the week so that they could show me that story when I got there. And from that moment on, I just knew that storytelling was the way to go. Because this classroom of comically homicidal children into being storytelling practitioners themselves. And so in that moment, I knew this was somewhere to go. I've taken a lot of time to perfect that since then. But man, that's where it started. That's when I knew, boy, this story stuff can work even with these hoodlums.
Yeah, so it's interesting. You're talking there about you made somebody be a tree or whatever in the story, as opposed to just telling a specific story about business. If you can relate other stories back to what you're doing or other items back to what you're doing, it seems like that could be a really powerful way to kind of use metaphors and stuff. I'm thinking specifically like a couple of years ago, I went skydiving, and the whole process of the fear leading up to, you're on the plane, and then all of a sudden your instructor's there and he's pushing you out the plane and stuff. And then you have this free falling experience and whatnot. Being able to tie that into a business situation seems like that could be a really powerful way for people to remember the story as opposed to just talking about the business situation.
Right now, as we record this, we're in the midst of this pandemic in 2020, and issues of fear for business owners are a big deal right now. Even everyone is a little bit, if not outright fearful of what their future is. There's some trepidation about where it's going. And we look at world folktales, things like that. Sometimes we tell stories of what we did in our business, but also sometimes we grab hold of these world folktales that really illustrate for us these principles that the world has been talking about for a long time. The quick version of a story that I have been saying a lot to business owners right now is there was once a village visited by a giant, and when the giant came into the village, he would swing his club and yell death and destruction, and the people would run away, and the giant would destroy the city and little town. And so from each little town to each little town, the giant would come in, death and destruction, and the people would run, and they ran to the armies, and they said, you have to defeat this giant. So the armies came and parked themselves in front of the giant, and when the giant approached, death and destruction, he destroyed all their equipment, and everyone ran to the castle seeking the wisdom of the king. When they got to the king, they said, you have to do something about this death and destruction, this terrible giant that's coming our way. What are we going to do? And the king thought for a while, and then went and consulted his best advisor, which was the woman who worked in the kitchen, and asked her for a bit of advice, and simply whispered something in her ear. Well, then he rode out to where the giant was with just himself, no weapons, just him upon a horse. And when he got to where the giant was, he dismounted and he stood and he faced that giant. The giant started to yell, death and destruction, death and destruction. And the king took one step towards the giant, and the giant shrank just a little bit. Death and destruction, death and destruction. One step, sleep down again. Death and destruction, death and destruction. He took another step towards him. The giant kept shrinking. Death and destruction, until the giant was that big. At that point, the king picked up the giant and put him on his palm and said, what is your name? And the giant said, I am fear. And with that, the giant released fear. With that, the king released fear and sent him on his way and taught people what the woman in the kitchen had taught him, which is, whenever you are afraid, whenever you are challenged, turn around, just walk right towards it. For me, that's one of those illustrative stories right now that talk about what we're in the midst of. And so we're not the first people to encounter fear. We're not the first people to encounter challenge. You faced your fear when you jumped out of an airplane, you silly man. That you face that fear. Now, anyone who's listening to this podcast right now, I'm going to suspect has faced fear in their own stories. And you can use stories like that little folk tale I just told you, like your story of jumping out of an airplane, and how that fear shrunk as you got through that process. You turned around and you faced. We're all doing that right now. So my thing to people is, what one of your challenge stories right now, 7 lists, one of your challenge stories right now is, what are you doing things afraid of right now? What are you doing about the things that cause you to doubt? How are you embracing? What does that narrative look like for you? That's something I do with somebody in coaching, is say, what does this look like now? For Greg, his illustration is jumping out of a plane. I don't know what everybody else is.
Okay, so I'm going to take us what might be in a little bit different direction. I don't know, but we mentioned this offline here, is that you said that the elevator pitch is dead. Can you tell us what that's all about?
The elevator pitch, this concept that there's a 2-minute magical speech that you're going to make when you get in the top of an elevator with an important person who can fund your business or whatever. And by the time you get magically down to the bottom floor, you would have said these magic words that will just make that person open their wallet. Okay, that's magic for one. That's magic. And, magic's entertaining, but magic is no way to run a business. What we're saying to people is, instead of saying, I have a magical speech, what you do is you have a pile of time adjustable stories that you use for the right person at the right moment. Not everyone is an automaton that you can say the right 2-minute words to and suddenly they'll do what you want. Nobody does. And I think that affects people. Trying to sell anybody anything elevator, one. But when somebody stands in front of you, you have only a moment to tell them something. If you've taken at all a moment to hear what they're saying first, the first task of a storyteller is to listen. The first task of a business owner is to listen to your clients, listen to your customers. Once you know something about them, and then you can go in your head, I've got this cache of stories in my head. Let me tell you something that applies to you. And you do that in a time adjustable format. The story I told you a moment ago of the kids in the 8th grade classroom, that's a much bigger story. We could do your 20 minutes talking through that whole experience. Pull it to you very quickly. I took the pieces you don't need at the moment, and I left those beginning, middles, and end. I threw in the extra piece about the teacher rolling her eyes because we had the time, but I don't always say that to people. That's not always in there. So instead of an elevator speech where you're going at someone, use storytelling to be with someone. Hear them, respond to them with something that you have worked on that fits them in that moment. That's why I'm saying the elevator speech is dead. What's here now is time adjustable stories that are designed to reach out to the person who's in front of you, whether that's in print or video or standing across your counter.
Yeah, I think that the other part of that too, this kind of came to me as you were saying that, is that an elevator pitch is often a sales pitch. And what you really want to do is what you're saying is listen to the person, and then based upon what they're saying is approach them with, how can I help you with whatever it is that you just said?
Yeah. Yes. How can I help you? I get people on like, discovery calls with me for coaching and things like that, and then talk for a while, and then they'll say, so where's the sales pitch? I don't have one. My thing is to listen, to respond to who's in front of me, to be present at that moment with people, which sounds kind of woohoo out here, but that's where people are right now. So yeah, you're listen and respond, be responsive. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you tell us what some of the problems are that companies have, businesses have with storytelling in general?
Yeah, there's something out there that I call the lure story, like fishing lure, a lure, L-U-R-E, lure story. I was booked a service for a conference I was going to do, a very common type of service that you use at conferences. And so we called around to different places to get quotes I just asked people, so why are you in this business? I would ask them the questions. And from one company in particular, I got the most moving story about why they were formed, what their history was, how they dealt with customers. I got the most moving, compelling story from them that aligned with my company's values. And I was like, okay, you're the company, you're the one. And we placed the order for this. And then when the day of the event arrived and her staff came and delivered the product that we had ordered from them, it was a total different experience. Her staff had never heard anything she said to me. I lured in to this complex idea and story, frankly, of what she was going to do. But on the day of, the staff had no idea. The people I was dealing with were just as cranky as any other company in the world. Again, they weren't bad people, but they were not happy. And it had nothing to do with what she told me on the phone. So I had been lured in to her organization by her magical story. When time to deliver, she couldn't do that. Well, I never used her company again, that's for sure. So I got lured in. So the lure story is really interesting. The lure story says that I've created this kingdom. I'm going to tell you about it and capture you. And so people will think, well, does it matter if I lie in a story? Does it matter if I bend the truth in a story? Yes, it does, because it becomes a lure story. Her people couldn't deliver on the story. Be very cautious about telling people what you wish your story was and presenting as truth. Because she was presenting a truth to me that she wished her company was doing. Very frustrating for me as the final end user. Man, I was all ready to back her up. I paid a premium price for it because I believed her story. That was a lure story. That was hoping her magic or magic story would help me, and it doesn't. And I see that in companies frequently. I have to stop them and go, wait, do you do that? Do you really deliver that? And they're like, well, we're stretching the truth. No, don't stretch the truth.
Yeah, you're better off over delivering.
Bingo, over deliver. Let your lure story, then not your lure story, let your real stories come from your customer who say, when you showed my conference, I cannot believe how good your staff was. Because I'll put that on video for a client any day.
Absolutely.
Social proof, I'll give it to them.
Okay, well, this has been fascinating. We're running out of time here. Is there kind of any last thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
There's an old phrase that says that the shortest way between two people is a story. That's pretty true right now, especially as people are under stress and duress in the time period when we've recorded this. Let's quit viewing our clients and customers as objects to empty of their goods. Let's really embrace people. Let's create companies and organizations that really are about human relationships right now. Because I think this new normal, whatever the new normal is going to be, relationships are really going to matter. And stories are the shortest way, quickest way to embrace that. Tell people the truth, be honest, be direct, be open, grab your stories. There's an old Aesop tale that talks about a crow looking for a pitcher of water, and he couldn't find one until suddenly one appeared below him. And when he got to the pitcher, the water level was too low. So he would take pebbles and just drop pebbles in the pitcher one by one until the water level rose. And then he could stick a beak in, and then he could drink the water and just drop in more pebbles when he wanted the water to come back up to level. I think our stories are those pebbles with our clients. Just drop them in, be focused on them, let that water level rise, let it come up, be focused, care about people, use those stories to bring that water level up, and that's when you get rewarded.
Sounds great. I'm going to remember that story actually about the pebbles. That's good.
It's an Aesop story, sure. Yeah, that Aesop's a great source for really short, simple stories. Yeah.
So how can our listeners stay in touch with you?
Sure. Thanks. First off, thank you for inviting me. I'm very grateful to be with you today. Thanks.
Glad you've been here.
I like the work that you're doing. My primary website, kind of the entryway into what we do, besides finding me on Facebook and Twitter and social media and all that, my primary website is morethanspeaking.com, and that will introduce you to the coaching materials and the coaching system that we use. So morethanspeaking.com. I'm pretty active on Facebook and Instagram. If people are looking on Facebook, just for Sean Tells, SeanTells.com. Facebook.com/Sean Tells, CANTELLS. That's my primary page. And over on Instagram, I'm at the same thing, Sean Tells, SeanTells. I'm always looking to talk to people. Let's get started. Let's talk about your stories.
Perfect. That's make sure that gets in the show notes as well. And I want to just say thanks, Sean, for being here today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of 20 Minutes of Influence. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you are interested in booking myself as a speaker at one of your events or are interested in any of my coaching programs, please visit gregjameson.com.